The man who fell to earth and landed in Malton. When a respected University of Toronto astronomer vanishes after a late-night stargazing session, detectives Mick and McCathie and MacNeely are pulled into a case that starts in the sky and quickly drops into dangerous territory on the ground. Is it a flying saucer, a spy plot, or something more? Welcome back to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. I'm Jay Nickel of Nickel Investigations, and you're listening to another Whodunit Wednesday in a Mick and Mack mystery, where we step into the world of classic detective fiction. Go back to the golden era of detective fiction and enjoy stories in the tradition of the greats of writing, from Agatha Christie to Raymond Chandler to John Creasy. These are short stories I hope you enjoy. Chapter 1. Missing in the Milky Way. The knock on Chief Stewart's office door was sharp and irregular. Mack's, not Mick's. Mick's knocks had a rhythm. Mack's had opinions. "Come," grunted the chief. The door creaked open, and in came Mick, tall and wiry as ever, brown overcoat trailing a breeze, followed by Mack, broader, breezier, and halfway through a roast beef sandwich he hadn't been officially cleared to bring in. "Sorry, Chief," Mack said through a mouthful. "We were just in the middle of—" "Sit down, shut up, and listen." The tone stopped both men mid-step. Even the sandwich froze. Chief Bernard Stewart stood at the window, hands behind his back, hat in the desk. Sure sign something was wrong. He wasn't a man to remove his fedora lightly. The mid-morning light caught the silver in his hair and the frown that had been carved into his face since Dieppe. "The man's gone missing," Stewart said. "A civilian. One of the good ones." Mick took the chair nearest the door. "Not our usual racket. This one's different. University of Toronto, astrophysics, name's Julian Bryce." Mack whistled low. "The stargazer. I've read about him. Wrote a paper saying black holes might be real things and not just fairy stories. He also thinks there might be water on Mars, so clearly the man's cracked." "He's not cracked," Stewart snapped. "He's careful, brilliant, and missing." "When?" Mick asked, voice even. "Last night. Took a walk after a departmental meeting. They meet once a week, informal stuff. Thought he'd stop off at his usual observation spot near High Park. That was about 9 p.m. He didn't come home. Didn't show up to class this morning. His wife called it in." "Any signs of struggle?" Mick asked. "Nothing, not even in his car. It's like he vanished." "That happens to astronomers," Mack said. "They spend their lives looking up. One woman was bound to fall in eventually." Stewart didn't smile, didn't even blink. "That's what I thought too," he said, pacing to his desk, "until I called the university." "And?" Mick prompted. They didn't sound surprised. That got their attention. Stewart leaned forward, voice low. He said Bryce had been distracted lately, nervous. And get this, he's spending time with a man I know personally, Arthur Penrose. "The museum guy?" Mack asked, "with the tweed and the opinions?" "Same. Bryce, Penrose, and 2 others. An astronomer, a botanist, and an old soldier. I've been meeting quietly off campus for over a year now." "To do what?" Mick asked. "They talk about lights in the sky." Mack sat up. "What kind of lights?" "The kind that don't come from any plane you or I have flown," Stewart said grimly. "Before you laugh, I saw them myself over Normandy. They moved faster than anything the Luftwaffe had. No sound, no trail." Mick leaned back thoughtful. "You think Bryce's disappearance has something to do with—" "I don't think anything yet, but no fear when I see it. Bryce was afraid, and now he's gone." There was a long silence. Even Mack's sandwich forgot it existed. Finally, Mick said, "All right, we'll take a look." "You'll do more than that," Stewart said, his voice low and tight. "You'll find him." He put on his hat. And just like that, the meeting was over. Chapter 2. Men Who Stare at the Sky. The ride to Rosedale was quiet. Too quiet for Mac, who usually treated car rides like auditions for a late-night radio comedy hour. Mick, hands on the wheel, said nothing. He was thinking, parsing Stuart's words, Bryce's disappearance, and that strange gleam in the chief's eye when he spoke in the Normandy. "You're awfully quiet," Mac finally said, unwrapping a peppermint. "So are you." "Yeah, but I'm usually full of something. You? You only go this silent when you're thinking, or when you're in love." Mick's eyebrow twitched. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm just saying, if we find out this Bryce fellow ran off with some alien Venusian blonde, I want you to promise not to take it personally." Mick didn't reply, but the car turned a little sharper than usual at the next corner. The private lounge sat tucked between two Georgian homes on a quiet Rosedale street, disguised as a former gentleman's club. A brass knocker, a frosted glass window, and curtains that didn't quite match the neighborhood's taste for subtlety. A sign above the door read, "The Etherean Society." Inside, the smell of pipe smoke clung to the walnut walls like a lingering ghost. A few leather chairs ringed the fireplace. A tea service stood on the sideboard untouched. Books lined the shelves, everything from the Martian Chronicles to the Report on Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, Air Ministry Archive, 1944. Chief Stewart was already there, standing by the fireplace. "Didn't take you too long." "You said lights in the sky," Mac replied. "We figured you weren't invited for bridge night." Stewart gestured to the armchairs. "Sit down. You should know who we're dealing with." He handed over a small folder with photographs. Mick leafed through them. Images of 4 people in casual conversation, some grainy newspaper clippings, and one oddly captivating shot of Bryce, caught mid-laugh beneath the telescope. "There's me," Stewart said. "You know Penrose, curator at the ROM. Head full of hieroglyphs and too many theories about ancient astronauts. Then there's Dr. Maureen Lindholm, botanist and beekeeper." "A beekeeper?" Mac asked. "She studies how wildflowers affect bee migration and pollination patterns, especially along roadsides. She's got a theory about bees sensing magnetic interference. Thinks they respond to aircraft frequencies." Mac blinked. "What's in the tea around here?" Stewart ignored him. "We meet once a month. Started off just comparing notes about strange sightings. Nothing formal. But it got serious last spring. That's when Bryce started talking about what he'd seen." "What had he seen?" Mick asked. Stewart looked at the fireplace for a long moment. He never said exactly. But 3 weeks ago, he came in shaken, pale. Said he received a photo through the mail, no return address. Showed a disc-shaped craft hovering over a structure he swore was part of the AV Row complex out in Malton. "The Avrocar?" Mick asked. Stewart nodded. "Maybe. Or something like it." Bryce had connections at the university. He met a young engineer from the Malton facility who said some of the higher-ups were terrified of leaks. "What happened to the photo?" Mick asked. Bryce said he destroyed it. Said just having it could get someone killed. Mac leaned forward. "And what were his last words to you?" Stewart didn't speak right away. Then quietly, he looked me in the eye and said, "I think someone saw it. Really saw it. Then he left. That was 4 nights ago." "You didn't think to mention this earlier?" Mac asked. "I needed to be sure I could trust you two," Stewart said. Mick looked at the books again. "Penrose, Lindholm, Bryce, you. You're chasing something." "We're not chasing it," Stewart said. "We're watching it. And sometimes it watches back." Chapter 3. The Malton Mystery. A cold wind rolled off the airfield of Malton, rattling hangar doors and tugging at overcoats. Out past the barbed wire fences, aircraft squatted like resting beasts, hulking metal forms lit by harsh sodium lights. Somewhere beneath them, something stranger was hiding. Mick and Mack walked briskly toward the security gate, IDs in hand. "You sure these will pass muster?" Mack muttered, flashing a laminated badge. Mick didn't slow his stride. "Official enough. Bureau of Aeronautical Research, Department of External Affairs. Even if it's nonsense, it sounds impressive when you say it fast. Remind me never to play poker with you." The guard, a young corporal with a regulation haircut and the attention span of a mayfly, checked the names and waved them through. Third hangar on the left asked for Commander Thurlow. Inside the hangar smelled of oil, metal, and nerves. Commander Thurlow was built like a torpedo and spoke like one, fast, direct, and designed to pierce. "We've had no leaks," he snapped. "This is a secure facility." "We're not investigating a leak," Mick said smoothly. "We're investigating a disappearance." "Then check the city morgue. This isn't a milk run for missing persons." Mack stepped forward. "What if the missing person has been talking to one of your boys? Maybe asking questions about flying saucers?" Thurlow's jaw twitched. "You're talking about Karczewski?" Mick nodded. "That's a start." Thurlow let out a sigh, like air escaping from a pressurized valve. "Peter Karczewski, design engineer, propulsion systems. Brilliant, twitchy, and lately, erratic." "In what way?" Mick asked. "Kept talking about a photo. Said someone took a picture of the project from above, an impossible angle. Claimed it showed the full saucer mid-hover, clear enough to count rivets. He swore it came from outside the facility." "He showed it to anyone?" "No. Said he burned it, but he became obsessed. Started checking security logs, asking who had clearance to the upper gantries. Got paranoid. Thought he was being followed." "Was he?" Mick asked. Thurlow hesitated. "Hard to say. You know how it is. Everyone thinks they're being followed during a security audit." But then he started talking to outsiders. "Dr. Bryce," Mick said. "Exactly. Bryce was here twice. Legitimate reasons. Academic consultations. Joint grant projects, all papered up. But Karczewski asked to see him privately." "What did they talk about?" Mack asked. "No one knows. Last time Bryce was here, Karczewski skipped the exit logs. Left on foot. That was 5 days ago." "And when did Karczewski disappear?" Mick asked. 2 nights ago. Didn't show up for morning briefing. His passcode was used to access the east gate at 11:27 p.m. No sign of him since." "Any chance he just walked away?" Mack asked. Thurlow frowned. "Peter wasn't a drinker. No girlfriend. No debts. He was proud. Proud of this project. No way he'd abandon it." Mick looked toward the covered object in the center of the hangar. A massive tarp was draped over a saucer-shaped bulge. Nearby engineers were hunched over blueprints like monks over scripture. "You still working on the Avrocar?" Mick asked. "That's classified," Thurlow said. "Then I'll take that as a yes." Outside, the cold wind had stiffened. Mick lit a cigarette, squinting toward the airstrip. "So," Mack said, pulling his collar up. "One guy vanishes after saying someone saw the flying saucer. The other guy vanishes after showing him proof." Mick nodded. "This case just jumped from missing person to national security." "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Mick glanced sideways. "I hope not. Because what I'm thinking involves foreign agents, classified tech, and a photograph someone killed to get." Mack blew out a breath. "I was thinking I should have worn thicker socks." They both turned as the hangar door groaned shut behind them. The sound echoed like a warning. Chapter 4. A Whisper to Eve. It was raining by the time Dr. Arthur Penrose arrived at the usual cafe in Bloor Street. Not the gentle kind that smelled like spring. This was the grim, gray sort that pressed its forehead against the windows, made everyone inside sip their tea more slowly. Penrose adjusted his umbrella and ducked inside, his worn briefcase dripping like a nervous witness. A waiter nodded toward the back corner. Eve Whitmore was already seated. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a wartime espionage novel. Tailored trench coat, dark gloves, one eyebrow slightly raised as if expecting trouble, and daring it to be late. Her coffee sat untouched. Penrose approached cautiously and slid in the booth opposite her. "You said to come alone." "I did." "You said it was urgent." "It is." She studied him for a moment. Then Penrose leaned in. "They're watching A.V. Rowe." Eve didn't blink. "Who?" "The Soviets." "Always are," she said softly. "What changed?" Penrose opened his briefcase and carefully removed his sealed envelope. Inside, a sketch. A remarkably detailed drawing of the Avrocar, complete with propulsion markings and curvature ratios. "I've seen this before," Eve murmured. "It's not an official schematic," Penrose said. "It's a recreation, done by hand, from memory." "Whose memory?" "Peter Karzewski's." That earned a reaction. Eve's eyes sharpened. "He told Bryce about it," Penrose continued. "Said someone took a photo, a real one, that showed the entire craft, not from the ground level, from above. An angle you'd only get if you were inside the facility, or flying over it." Eve leaned back, and now Karzewski's vanished. Penrose nodded grimly. "He was paranoid, thought the Soviets had eyes inside. I told him to lie low, that I'd speak to someone who could help." She considered that for a moment. Then, "I already have." Later that night, in the smoke-filled back room above a cigar shop off Spadina, Eve sat with Manny the Hat Kaufman. He wore a striped waistcoat, a massive fedora that defied physics, and a look that said he knew exactly what everyone owed him, emotionally or otherwise. "Let me get this straight," Manny said, swirling his scotch. "You want me to fake a kidnapping?" "No," Eve replied coolly. "I want you to create the illusion of a man skipping town over gambling debts. Bad ones. Make it look like he knew he was in too deep. Tried to weasel out and vanish before things turned messy. And this man, he owes me money? Let's say you told him not to sit in on a certain game. Let's say you did. Bad luck, bad cards, bad company. Does he actually gamble? No." Manny laughed. "Perfect." Eve slid a folder across the table. "That's his photo. Last known movements. Friends to steer clear of. No real enemies. No trail. I want a whisper campaign. One that'll bounce from bar stool to bookie to back alley by morning." Manny raised an eyebrow. "You want this loud or quiet?" "Quiet enough to fool the cops," Eve said, "but noisy enough to scare off anyone else asking questions." Manny nodded slowly. "You're protecting him." "I'm protecting what he knows." "And if the Soviets come asking?" "They won't." "Because?" She met his eyes. "Because they think someone already got to him." Manny grinned. "You're dangerous, doll." "No," Eve replied, rising from her seat. "I'm cautious. There's a difference." By dawn, the rumor mill was grinding. Peter Karzewski owed 10 grand to a man with broken fingers and a memory like a steel trap. He'd been seen arguing with a pair of heavies behind a pool hall in college. Then he vanished. No notes, no luggage, just a bad smell and worse luck. Mick and Mack, hearing the whispers later that day, exchanged a look. "This feels off," Mick said. "It always does," Mack replied. "But it's also got Manny's fingerprints all over it." Mick frowned, which means someone wants us looking in the wrong direction. Mack lit a cigarette and shrugged. "Well, let's go that way and see who tells us to stop." Chapter 5. Alien Autopsy of the Truth. Tell me again why we're interviewing a man who believes he was abducted by celery, Mac muttered, tapping his notebook against his knee. Mick sighed, adjusting his fedora as he stared at the sagging front porch of a house just west of High Park. Paint peeled like sunburned skin, and a set of mismatched lawn ornaments, gnomes mostly, watched them with glassy indifference. Because, Mick said, according to the log, this man filed a report the same night Karczewski disappeared. Because Chief Stewart thinks it's worth our time. Mac grunted. Starting to think Stewart still has a little shrapnel lodged behind the common sense lobe. The door creaked open. Standing there was a man in his 60s, wiry, sunburned, and shirtless despite the chill. Gray hair stood in tufts, and his eyes held the kind of focus usually reserved for cracked lenses. Detectives? He asked. You hear about the event? Mick offered a patient smile. We are. The man nodded solemnly. Come in. Don't touch the telescope. It remembers things. They sat in a cluttered sitting room surrounded by dusty astronomy journals, lukewarm herbal tea, and what appeared to be a papier-mâché model of Saturn wearing a monocle. I seen it, the man, who introduced himself as Reginald Boone, said. Right there above the ravine. Lights in a perfect triangle. Hovering quiet as a ghost in slippers. Then zoom, straight up, like it saw a spider. Max squinted. A spider? They hate spiders. Everybody knows that. Mick cleared his throat. Mr. Boone, did you see a man? A human man being taken? Oh, yes. He was glowing, pale. Floated up into the sky like a scoop of ice cream in reverse. Could you describe him? About average height. Wearing socks. Probably terrified. Hard to tell. My retinas were temporarily inverted. Mac blinked. Temporarily what now? You want proof, Boone stood, knocking over a mug. Come on, I drew it. In the hallway, beneath a crooked portrait of Nikola Tesla, riding a velociraptor, hung a charcoal sketch. The image was unexpected. It showed a large disk hovering in the air, vents along the bottom, circular ridges. No aliens, no beams, but the aircraft bore a suspicious resemblance to the Avrocar diagram Mick had seen in Penrose's folder. Where did you get this design, Mick asked. Saw it, Boone said. Before the lights vanished, I remembered it, down to the grooves. Mac stepped forward. Wait, you're saying you saw the actual machine? Not a spaceship? Well, it was a spaceship, Boone said indignantly. Just one built by people, clearly. Who else would design something so inefficient? Mick pulled Mac aside. This isn't just a tall tale, he whispered. That design, it's too close. Mac glanced over at Boone, who was now wearing a homemade tinfoil hat with a chin strap. Think he actually saw the Avrocar? Maybe. Maybe someone showed him a photo and told him to remember it wrong. You're saying this is a smokescreen? Exactly. Someone's feeding this UFO nonsense to bury the real leak. By the time they left, the sun had slipped low, casting the street in the long shadows of a late Toronto afternoon. Mac tugged his coat tighter. So we've got gamblers, spies, scientists, a vanishing engineer, and now alien pranksters. Mick lit a cigarette, staring into the distance. Someone's building a story so ridiculous no one will believe the truth. Mac kicked a loose stone. Funny, isn't it? All these people want to believe in aliens. The real monsters are wearing badges and ties. Mick exhaled slowly. Some of them are watching us right now. Chapter 6. Red Stars over Ontario. Sky over Toronto had turned bruised and sullen by the time Mick and Mack reached the University of Toronto's observatory. The dome structure stood like a lidded eye in the edge of the campus, half swallowed by late autumn trees. What are we hoping to see? Mac asked as they climbed the stone steps. Maybe he was doing the watching, Mick replied. Inside the place was quiet, too quiet. A few dusty planetary charts fluttered under a draft. A janitor nodded as they passed. No sign of Bryce, no sign of anyone, really. Until Eve stepped out of the shadows. "You're late," she said, arms crossed. She was wearing a charcoal suit with a matching hat and an expression that could freeze a furnace. Mac blinked. "How did you—" "I'm always early." She handed Mick a small envelope. Inside, a surveillance photo, grainy but clear enough. A tall, silver-haired man in a long coat stood near the telescope platform. In the background, familiar Gothic architecture and a bicycle rack that matched the observatory's east wing. The man was holding a leather folio and talking to no one. Mick frowned. Who was he? "Dr. Yuri Demchenko," Eve said. "Officially, he's an astrophysicist, visiting from Leningrad to lecture on solar flare patterns." Max sorted. "Unofficially?" Eve smiled thinly. "KGB. Specialist in aerial reconnaissance and scientific infiltration. He's not here to admire the moon." "Looking for Karczewski?" Mick asked. Eve nodded. "The Soviets have picked up rumors. I think Peter had access to something dangerous, something beyond his pay grade. They don't believe he skipped town over cards. They're watching everyone he ever spoke to, including you." "Us," Max said. "We don't even have clearance." "Exactly," Eve replied, "which makes you unpredictable. And that's what they hate most." They moved to the observation platform, where the air was sharp and the sky above glittered with stars too distant to care. Eve leaned on the rail. "The alien story worked for a few days. It muddied the waters. The Soviets aren't stupid. They know this city. They know how to sniff out real threats." "So what's their next move?" Mick asked. "They'll follow the trail. Anyone who knew Peter, anyone who met with Bryce, anyone who sneezed near the Avrocar blueprints." "They'll come here again," Max said, looking out over the quiet town. "They already have," Eve said. "But now they're being bolder." Mick turned. "Then we get ahead of them." Eve handed him a second note, written in sharp block letters. "Karczewski, Union Station, Platform 6, 9:05 p.m., Windsor. A friend." Mac blinked. "You believe this?" "I don't have to," Eve said. "You're the detectives." Union Station was its usual chaos. Porters shouting, heels clicking, trains exhaling steam like tired dragons. Mick and Mack made their way through the crowd toward Platform 6, scanning faces. "He wouldn't go to Windsor," Mack said. "He's not the sun and sand type." "Maybe he's not going there," Mick said. "Maybe he's passing through." The platform was nearly empty except for a few commuters and a man in a flat cap nervously checking his watch. Then a movement, quick, practiced. A handoff. A man stepped from the shadows, brushed past the one in the cap, slipped a folded piece of paper into his pocket. Mick moved fast, closing the gap in 3 long strides. "Evening." The man froze. "Care to tell me what's got you pacing the platform?" Mick asked. I'm just waiting for—" Max snatched the note from the man's pocket and read it aloud. "He's not gone. He's hidden. She moved him. You're not the only ones watching." Mick looked up sharply. "Who gave you this?" The man trembled. I don't know his name. Just said he had a message for the police." "Which police?" The man looked confused. "You. He said you'd understand." Mac folded the note carefully and tucked it into his coat. "Let's hope we do." Back on the street, the chill deepened. The city's pulse beat steady under the street lamps, but something had shifted. "They're on to Eve," Mac said, "aren't they?" Mick nodded, "which means she's running out of time." They walked on in silence, boots echoing on wet pavement. Somewhere far above, a shooting star blinked across the sky. Or maybe something else. Chapter 7. Stuart's Secret Skies. The Royal Canadian Military Institute sat in University Avenue like an old war horse, stoic, scarred, and still standing. Inside, the wood-paneled lounge was dim and heavy, with the scent of cigar smoke, old leather, and older loyalties. Wartime portraits stared down from the walls as if weighing the worth of every conversation. Mick and Mack found Chief Stewart at the far end of the bar, already nursing a whiskey inside the bottom of his glass like it held enemy troop movements. "You're late," he said without looking up. "You're early," Mick replied, sliding onto the stool beside him. Mack flagged down the bartender. "Scotch for me. Something peaty enough to scare off ghosts." The bartender grunted. He'd heard worse. Stewart downed what remained in his glass and motioned for another. "I saw it," he said, before either detective could ask. Mick turned toward him. "The Foo Fighter?" Stewart nodded. Night of June 5th, 1944. We were prepping for the Normandy push. I was flying escort in a Mosquito. Quiet skies. Barely any German movement yet. Then, it was there. "Describe it," Mick said softly. "No sound, no lights, just movement. Fast and unnatural. Didn't arc like a plane, it pivoted. Changed direction in a way that made every hair on my neck stand at attention." Mack leaned forward. "Enemy aircraft?" "I thought so. Radioed it in. No response. No radar ping, no shadow. Then it vanished. Straight up like a bullet through black velvet." He sipped again, this time slower. "I filed a report. Got a visit the next day. Intelligence types told me I'd seen a weather balloon. Said to keep quiet. For morale." "Did you?" Mick asked. Stewart looked at them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I waited until 1947. And they started the group, quietly. Just men and women who'd seen things and weren't ready to call themselves crazy." "Embraced?" Mack asked. "Smartest man I knew. But once he saw that photo, it changed him." Mick pulled a surveillance note from his coat and slid it across the table. "He's not gone. He's hidden. She moved him." Stewart read the note, then exhaled through his nose. "Eve. She covered his tracks," Mick said. "But now the Soviets are circling. Demchenko's in town and he's not here for a sightseeing tour." Stewart drained his glass. "Then it's worse than we thought." Mack raised a brow. "Because of Karczewski?" "Because of what he saw. That photo wasn't just a leak, it was a lens, a way of seeing how the secrets are being stolen, who's doing it, and why." He turned toward the window where the city shimmered with distant light. "You boys still think this is about flying saucers?" Mick stayed silent. Stewart looked back at them. "This is about power. The kind we barely understand. If that photo shows the Avrocar in full hover, from a bird's eye view, then someone has technology we don't have. Either a spy or something worse." Mack tapped his glass, thinking. "You think this is a war?" Stewart didn't answer, but he poured another drink. And that was answer enough. Chapter 8. Penrose Decodes the Sky. Dr. Arthur Penrose's office at the Royal Ontario Museum, once being a curator's haven. Quiet, dusty, and filled with polite relics. But tonight, it looked more like a war room. Sheets of tracing paper were pinned to the wall beside ancient maps of Mesopotamia. A desk lamp burned low over a chaos of notes, photographic negatives, and a battered Enigma rotor that hadn't been turned in nearly a decade. And at the center of it all, a single grainy photo of the Avrocar. Penrose adjusted his spectacles and muttered to himself as he traced the faint notations around the edge of the print. His hands, still steady despite age and arthritis, moved with practiced precision. He hadn't decrypted a cipher in years, But like riding a bicycle, the method never left you. He began cross-referencing the seemingly random marks, tiny dots and slashes in the photo margins, dismissed by most as printer artifacts. But Penrose saw them for what they were. Marker code. Lattice position cipher, Soviet style. He jotted down coordinates, cross-checked them with aerial photography grids, aligned them with recent industrial maps of the Malton airfield. And then he froze. The markers weren't random. They aligned with observation points at natural cover, rooftops, trees along the perimeter. 2 were inside the fence. He marked them in red ink, hands tightening. You're not just stealing a photo, he whispered. You're stealing the sky. An hour later, Eve arrived. She swept in the office like the closing of a book, elegant, decisive, more dangerous than she looked. I came as soon as I got your message, she said. What did you find? Penrose didn't speak. He simply pointed to the wall. Eve took it in at a glance. Observation nodes? At least 4. One of them high enough to require interior access to the facility. A crane operator's platform restricted. The others are external but precise. Which means whoever took the photo had help from the inside, Eve said. Not just help, Penrose replied. Placement? Someone positioned to guide the lens. Coordinate handoff? This wasn't smuggled. It was transmitted. He handed her a sheet of graph paper filled with ciphered transpositions. The notations aligned with an old Soviet pattern I remember from Bletchley. It was used to mark dead drop zones and radio liaison sites. I think we're dealing with a handler-agent pair, possibly more. Eve studied the coordinates. This one, she said, pointing to a red triangle. That's inside the machine shop. Exactly. It narrows the suspect pool. Eve's eyes were already calculating. I'll need personnel rosters, shift logs, gate entries, and union schedules, she said briskly. You also need to move fast, Penrose said. If Demchenko thinks we're closing in. He won't wait, she finished. He'll act. Penrose nodded. Whoever this mole is, he added quietly, they didn't just leak a blueprint. They invited a foreign power to step into our future. Later that night, Eve sat alone in a borrowed office above a tailor shop in the annex. The building creaked when the streetcars passed. The radiator ticked like a countdown. She spread the shift schedules across the desk. 4 names stood out. One had left abruptly. One was reassigned just before the photo surfaced. One had family in Berlin. One had served in the Merchant Navy, with a record sealed by the War Office. She circled 2. Then picked up the phone. Put me through to Mick and Mack, she said. We've got suspects, and not much time. Chapter 9. Operation Starfall. The fog came in like an accomplice, rolling low off Lake Ontario, curling through laneways and around buildings with eerie precision. By midnight, it had swallowed the road entirely, turned the old Cold War listening post near Fort York into a ghost of its former self. Mick stood behind a broken fence, collar up, revolver tucked just out of sight. Could see Mac's silhouette across the clearing, leaning casually against a rusted generator box, chewing gum like he bet on it. I don't like the quiet, Mac muttered into the wire. It's the fog, Mick replied softly. It dampens everything, even bad intentions. From the shadows behind them, Eve's voice crackled through their earpiece. Targets inbound. 2 cars, no plates. They've taken the bait. The bait was a forged message. Intercepted radio chatter suggesting Peter Karzewski was scheduled to meet a contact here to flee the country. The Soviets were watching, even made sure of it. Now it was time to spring the trap. First car slid into the gravel lot, headlights off. A figure stepped out, tall, lean, moving with the confidence of someone used to walking behind enemy lines. Demchenko. Second man emerged from the other vehicle. He opened the rear door and scanned the fog. Karczewski, he called in a harsh whisper. You hear? Mick and Mack waited. Seconds passed. Then, now, Eve said. The clearing erupted with movement. Mick stepped forward, badge out, revolver raised. Toronto police, don't move. Mack flanked from the other side, his voice booming like a baritone cannon. Hands where I can see 'em, comrades. For a split second, no one moved. Then the second man lunged, straight into Mick, knocking him sideways. Mack tackled the taller one, and the clearing dissolved into a flurry of shouts, scuffling boots, and fog-drenched violence. Eve stepped in, calm and precise, leveling her pistol at the driver who was fumbling to escape. I wouldn't, she said coldly. When the dust and the fog settled, two men were on the ground, cuffed and glaring. Demchenko was gone. He had a backup route, Eve muttered. I underestimated him. Mack rubbed his jaw where he'd hit the ground. So did I. Mack lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. That guy moved like a snake in a minefield. Eve crouched next to one of the prisoners. Tell your friend Demchenko, we're not amateurs. Neither is the man you're looking for. The prisoner said nothing. She stood. We'll hold them for 48 hours. Then they'll vanish too, quietly, like smoke. Mick looked out across the lot. So what now? Now, Eve said, we go back to where this started. To the men who built the machine, and the ones who betrayed it. In the distance, the city lights flickered faintly through the fog. Somewhere above them, a plane droned overhead. Or maybe something else. Chapter 10. The Man Who Vanished. Again. The cottage sat in a wind-blown rise in the Kawarthas, just beyond the reach of electricity and second guesses. It had belonged to the ROM since the 30s, used mostly by researchers cataloging field specimens or recovering from academic scandals. Today it belonged to Peter Karczewski. He sat in the porch with a thermos of tea, wearing a fisherman's sweater that didn't quite fit, and a beard that wasn't quite convincing. He looked older, quieter, but alive. You saved my life, he said. Eve stood beside him, hands in her coat pockets, watching the lake turn silver in the rising sun. No, she said, I just moved it to a safer location. In Toronto, Mick and Mack stood in Penrose's office as he carefully fed the last photograph of the Avrocar in a small metal tray lined with flame. It caught quickly, the image curled, blackened, and then was gone. Why not keep it, Mack asked. Proof, for the file. Penrose removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Proof is for people who don't already believe. And this was a fuse waiting to be lit. Outside, the ROM remained silent behind its pillars. A temple of truth with more secrets than most churches. At AV Row, new fences went up. Security tightened. A few names quietly disappeared from payroll. No announcements were made. No charges filed. But desks were emptied, files shredded, access revoked. As for Dr. Julian Bryce, he was found at the ROM's research cabin not far from Peter, recovering from a carefully staged nervous breakdown. He would return to the university in spring under strict instructions to forget everything he'd seen. He wouldn't, but he'd stop talking about it. To the public, the affair became a curiosity. A quiet engineer with a gambling problem, a misidentified weather balloon, a string of drunken UFO sightings. One editorial in the Globe and Mail dubbed it the Malton Martian Panic. By June, the story had faded, but not for everyone. Epilogue. One more night watch. The roof of police headquarters was cool and clear under a spring night sky. The city below hummed faintly, typewriters, streetcars, radios playing dance tunes into the dark. Chief Stewart stood by the telescope adjusting his brass fittings with a tenderness usually reserved for old dogs and older regrets. Mick joined him, hands in his pockets. Mack followed, a paper cup of coffee in each hand. "You still watching the skies?" Mick asked quietly. Stewart didn't look up from the eyepiece, still hoping for better answers. Mack handed him a coffee. "I'll settle for one night without a green man trying to stiff us on rent." Stewart smiled faintly. They stood in silence, staring upward. High above them, something moved fast, steady, and without sound. Blinking point of light slipping across the velvet sky. "Shooting star?" Mack asked. Mick watched it go. "Let's hope so." And for a moment all three men stood quietly. Police detectives, a veteran, and a sky full of questions. Waiting, watching, and wondering. Thank you for listening. This has been Jay Nickel of Nickel Investigations, and you've been listening to a Mick and Mack mystery on Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast.